everybody. Today I'm doing what I call a bit of bullseye. This is a review where I look at a car that I very seriously considered buying but just didn't for whatever reason. In case you're watching from America or you're young and you don't get the reference, Bullseye was a 1980s British TV show, and if you're in the mood, preferably if it's late at night and you may be a bit drunk, search out an old episode on YouTube and prepare to be amazed. It's a glorious slice of 1980s British culture. Wonderful show. So today's review is about this, a 2010 Porsche Panamera Turbo. Now I did actually consider buying one of these quite seriously instead of the Jaguar that I bought, which then turned into my Maserati. In many ways this is a fabulous car and probably the one that I should have bought, but a few things put me off, and I'll talk about those in a bit. In truth, the Panamera is really something of a modern miracle, because even in 2010, bringing out a car like this didn't seem to be a very sensible option. In fact, were the Panamera not already a pre-existing model, the Porsche of today would definitely, absolutely not be making a car like this. The reasoning is really rather simple. Even in 2010, the dominance of the SUV was becoming clear, and Porsche's Cayenne was doing very well for them indeed. Porsche had been flirting with the idea of a four-door saloon for quite some time, going so far as to build a one-off 928 four-door as a present to their boss. However, when the car actually launched, I think it's fair to say a lot of people were not that impressed. The reasoning really is down to one thing: the way it looks. On paper, this is actually a spectacular car. It's large but not massive. It was powered by a broad range of both petrol and diesel engines, with your smaller V6 diesels as the entry-level economical option, going all the way really up to the Turbo and Turbo S. This car puts out 500 horsepower, courtesy of a 4.8 litre direct-injected V8. It produces 550 pound-foot of torque, that's 700 newton-meters, more than enough to get a car which does weigh about 2 tons down the road at a fair old lick. It's not short of gadgets either, and in comparison to my Maserati, this is a real tech fest. It does make that car feel the age it is. Now, technically speaking, both the cars are actually the same year, but this was the first of the Panameras, and mine was the last of that generation Quattroporte, and they really do feel a generation apart. The infotainment in here is broadly the same as, say, a late 997, 911. You've got sat-nav that you could actually use. You've got a mixture of analog and digital screens up here that works really well. Some proper gauges too, including stuff you don't really see on cars very much at all anymore. We've got oil pressure. How many cars now give you an oil pressure gauge? You also have perhaps the sexiest, most over-engineered spoiler in motoring history. Look at that. Absolutely amazing. Not unsurprising, that's apparently one of the car's known failure points. Although the entry-level Panameras were offered with a manual, you almost never see them, and the higher-end cars like this Turbo came exclusively with the 7-speed PDK gearbox, at the time a fairly new thing. The overall impression really is one of a very high-quality car. It feels infinitely better put together than the Maserati. It's got leather on everything, very nice dark Alcantara headliner, although that does make the rear seats just a little bit oppressive. You see, the reason this car looks so strange is it was built as a fairly sleek looking thing, but Porsche's boss at the time, Wendelin Wiedeking, insisted on being able to sit in the back in comfort. And he's a fairly tall chap, so it wasn't until they basically raised the profile of the roof at the rear quite a bit that he gave it his seal of approval. And that's why it looks like a bit of an odd duck. Today's car is standard, barring an upgraded Miltech exhaust. Now, we're not sure exactly how much of the exhaust has been upgraded, but it was about 4 grand's worth, I'm told, and so we think quite a bit has been swapped out. This is good because the regular Turbo was noted for not making an awful lot of noise at all, whereas the naturally aspirated Panamera GTS sounds amazing. This car uses air ride suspension and feels very similar to a lot of other air-damped cars that I've driven. So the primary ride is excellent over less demanding surfaces. It's actually pretty good. It does float just a little bit. However, it has some real issues with the more demanding, smaller but sharper bumps. I went over some rumble strips earlier and the whole car just seemed to shudder and shake. It did not like it at all. However, we are currently driving in normal mode, and this is a car which I'm told, when you come to push it, really does defy physics. So, we're going to get it through the next town, I'll switch it into sport mode, and then we'll see what she's got. But, as a thing to just cruise about in, it's really quite nice. The steering doesn't have the pinpoint precision of a 911, which you wouldn't expect that. However, I'd say it's a little bit more natural and intuitive than the Maserati. The seats are also, I would say, a little bit better. They've got billion-way adjustment in them, so I think I could spend all day here trying to get them absolutely perfect, and eventually, I think you would find that. Oh, there's the lumbar, there's the seat back, oh, there's tilt, oh, there's everything, there's buttons. I think, no, that's not memory, because memory's up there. Oh, there's a lot you can do with these seats. Oh, that's the side bolster. Oh, yeah, oh, they're gripping. Although they're kind of gripping my back a little bit, but this is certainly doing a better job of holding me in place than the Mazda. That's terrible. Now, one of the issues with these cars, and to be fair, the Maserati is not really that much different, is they are quite big. Not quite sort of full, long wheelbase 7 Series or S-Class big, but not really that far off. So if you're going to use it for daily duties and you live in a sort of small British town like I do, you will find a bit of a struggle parking anywhere. I remember one of my neighbours got given one of these by his local Porsche dealer as a courtesy car for a few days, and he said he absolutely loved it, but he couldn't take it anywhere because it was far too big for every single parking space he could find. It does at least justify its size by having enough room in here for 4 adults, even if they're 6-footers, and the boot is an okay size too. I'd say probably similar to the Maserati, depends what kind of stuff you want to put in it. It's got an electric tailgate, although doesn't have soft closed doors, doesn't have double glazing like the Mazda, but does have heated seats and quite a few different modes. My Maserati rides on fixed suspension, so there's no adjustment to that whatsoever. This, you've got quite a few choices. Now, something I really don't like about this car is the way they want you to change gear. If you leave the PDK box to its own devices, it does a fairly good job of being an automatic. If you want to change gears yourself, there are 2 ways to do that. Either you can move the lever here, and you do that the wrong way, so forward for up, towards you for down, or you've got these very weird paddle button sort of mashups on the steering wheel, both of which operate the same way. So you push them for up and pull them for down. They feel quite nice in the hand, I have to say, but it's just a very bizarre setup. Had they been set so they were opposite ways to each other, you know, this one over here you pull for up, this one over here you pull for down, and then they do the opposite as well, that would have been very cool, because then you could drive this car one-handed and change gear yourself, like in a McLaren. That would be very nice, but this is just strange. The overall specification of this car too is, I would say, archetypal Porsche, in that it's very bland. And I have to say, I used to be a fan of this kind of look, and now I'm just not. You have a black exterior, luckily not black wheels, but you have black leather interior, black stitching, black headlining. It's a little bit dull. You would think, this car being on air ride and the Maserati on a deliberately sporty single rate setup, that this would be far better over the lumps and bumps and manhole covers and stuff. No, it's not. It's really quite unhappy. So thus far, actually, the Maserati, I think, is surprisingly the better car. But it's on a tight, twisty road where you want to have fun, that car does rather fall apart. Is this any better? Because it should be. Let's find out. So, I'm going to go with John's recommended setting of sport mode, but without sport dampers. Also going to put the car into manual and try and work with these paddles. Oh, and I should give you a bit of noise as well. there's no denying the straight line ability of this car. It's devastatingly fast and makes a mockery of its 2-ton curb weight. This thing is ludicrous. However, it actually, in some ways, feels like a massively oversized version of the Noble that I drove the other day. Yes, give me a minute, I will draw a parallel here. You see, once you start getting on it, the whole front seems to go a little bit light and the car becomes very, very vague. It's not that the steering is letting you down, it's just that you can tell it's really, really fighting to contain that weight. I've actually put the suspension into sport mode because in comfort the thing just wanted to roll around, and actually pretty sure I was getting air at some points. Turboed engine is very, very strong. There is lag, but it's reasonably imperceptible, and the thing responds pretty hard no matter what RPM you're at. Doesn't sound the most vocal from in here, it's always making the same sort of noises. There are some huge gaps between those gears. I mean, you see the revs drop massively sometimes between the ratios. Well, let's put it at lower RPM and see how she can pull in a more demanding situation. So 2000 RPM, 5th gear. Yeah, she'll still pick up, not instantly and not with the same savagery she would at 4 grand. That's, of course, a bit obvious. The Maserati, by comparison, is a naturally aspirated engine with a bit less power and a lot less torque, so you have to drive it in a very different way. I had hoped that this car might have a little bit better steering. I mean, it can go around the bends better than the Mazda, absolutely no doubt about that, and I'm not falling out of the seats like I would be in the Italian. However, you do feel just a little bit out of control with this thing. You are grateful for the all-wheel drive, and indeed, that's one of the reasons John wound up with this car. He has previously been a serial Jag buyer, but sold his car last year when work dried up. Then, when the work came back, he thought, right, I need something, and was initially going to buy a 4x4. For those 2 or 3 days of the year where it snows, he needs to be able to get to work. The family do have a Volvo XC90, but it's not going to see many more winters, so he was thinking of the Cayenne as a way of replacing that car and getting himself something a bit fun as well. Then when he went shopping, he remembered that Porsche make the Panamera, and that comes in all-wheel drive as well. With the turbo, that's standard. So he went out, found this, bought it, and has been very, very happy with it. He's not had it for all that long, so I can't tell you whether this car has been particularly reliable. It's not great on fuel. In fact, when he arrived, it was averaging 18 to the gallon, although over what time period that is, I don't know. The Panamera certainly has a better reputation for reliability than the Cayenne, but they still can and will go wrong. It's not always particularly expensive. Spare parts will be a bit of a mixed bag, and keep an eye out on the prices of things like brakes. It's on cars like this where you're often surprised because you'll find out they can be more expensive to replace than on a Ferrari. The Panamera model, generally speaking, has been reliable. You often find that it's the bigger engine cars, the V8s, which seem to be the more durable lumps. The old V6s are always the ones that seem to have reliability issues in the Cayenne as well as this. However, there are some things to be aware of. The oil level sensor on these is known to fail, and they don't have a dipstick. So if you are getting very inconsistent oil readings, do exercise some caution because you may damage the car by overfilling it. That spoiler mechanism has been known to fail on occasion, so do make sure that it operates correctly and properly. Any car with air suspension can have air suspension related problems, and I have to say that in general these seem to have a much better reputation than the equivalent Mercedes or Jaguar. If you are going to go and view one of these cars though, do make sure if you go and see it and it's cold that the car is sat nice and level and doesn't drop overnight, because that's a sign of a problem with your suspension. The pumps have been known to fail. They are expensive, but again, that's not something I'd be too concerned about. The big issue is the gearboxes. Generally speaking, PDK has been very robust, but in the Panamera they apparently do suffer. So make sure the car changes smoothly when it should and swiftly when it should. This gearbox is fairly nice. It doesn't have the same bite as in a 911, but then that wouldn't suit the nature of the car. The issue, I'm told, is that because this is a very big, heavy vehicle and it's driven in a very different way, even at low speeds you can actually feel it sort of working the clutch, which is very unusual for this kind of gearbox. And there are clutches in it. I mean, it's a dual clutch system, so they will still wear. The theory is that with most cars they wear at such a small rate. Essentially, the car would be shot to pieces long before the gearbox. However, with these, that's not always been the case. There have also been some recalls for various parts on these cars. Coolant hoses in particular have been something of an issue, so just make sure that the maintenance has been done and any recalls that are out there have been completed. In truth, I was put off of the Panamera for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it is an ugly duckling, and as much as I would like to say for my daily drive, a sort of ordinary boring car, it doesn't matter, it doesn't work that way. I'm a petrol head, I'm just wired that way. And the Maserati is simply the more appealing, more unusual car that interests me and excites me more. Also, at the budget I had, around 25 grand, I would be looking at either the top of the Maserati market or the bottom of the Panamera market. And generally speaking, I'd always much prefer to buy the best example of a car I could find rather than the worst. When you get to dealing with cars like this, you'll find that buying a cheap one is not cheap at all. Overall, this car has left me somewhat confused. The things it should be good at, going over manhole covers and the like, it's really very poor at. That ordinary daily driver stuff, it just seems to struggle more than it should. I'd also like one with a bit of a more exciting spec than this, and unfortunately you're just never going to get away from the fact that it's not a pretty car. That bothers some people, it doesn't bother others, but it would bother me. There's no doubting this is a quick car. I mean, like, devastatingly, seriously, properly, autobahn smashingly quick. The Maserati is feeble by comparison. Yes, it may have only 60 horsepower less, but in practice it's probably a heavier car and is so far down on torque, by the time the Maseratis come on song, this thing will be in the next postcode. The steering feel and interaction in here is maybe not quite as good as I'd hoped, but it's decent enough, you know what the car is doing. However, when you really do start to press on, there's still no escaping from the fact this is a big old bus. And that means it's not necessarily particularly happy at being dragged down a country road. It's not actually as difficult to place as you might imagine. Rear visibility is somewhat poor, but at the front you can see a lot of that bonnet more than you would expect, and so it's not a particularly daunting car to drive, but it is still a big old thing. That being said, I would still recommend to anyone and everyone who's considering a Cayenne to try one of these, because it should be, for the most part, a better car, really. I was expecting to come out of this review going, yep, you know what, it is indescribably ugly, but on every single other front it does roundly beat the Maserati. However, that's just not the case, and I'm itching now to get the Mazda back. Anyway, I want to say a big thank you to John for bringing this car out. Finally, my first experience of an early Panamera. Never driven one before. In fact, never driven a Panamera at all until this year when I drove the new one. Thanks to you as always for watching. Please like, comment down below, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.